You know, the more games I make, the more I like bad games. Not games that are bad, I hate those, but I love the experimental games that took a swing and missed spectacularly. I just think those games have way more to teach us, from both what went right and what went so very, very wrong. Because games are basically just combinations of systems that work together, hopefully. A lot of games have mechanics that just don't quite fit, but every now and again, a game will create such a winning combination that those mechanics end up becoming a whole genre. Which is what makes Zelda 2 so interesting to me, because it is, in my opinion, a mechanically bad game, yet still ends up introducing concepts that would define the Zelda franchise. It's also important because I'm making my own adventure RPG with some similarities to Zelda 2. Not on purpose, that's just how genres work. So I have stuff like an XP meter, level progression, waves of enemies, strange men in dark rooms offering you upgrades. You've played these games, you get it. My game was fine, but since I built my mechanics by copying from the genre, I wasn't able to refine it since I didn't understand the problems these design choices were trying to solve. Instead of adding more, which I did eventually, I decided to back all the way up and do some research. Where did these mechanics come from? What was I copying and why? Like, by having strangers hand out weapons, what problem is that trying to solve? Or what problem is it trying to cause, maybe? That last one comes from a famous story about the original Legend of Zelda. You start in a top-down world with nothing but a shield. You go down into a cave where an old man gifts you a sword and says it's dangerous to go alone, a line that would live on in the retro gaming section of Hot Topics across the world. Now the story goes, it wasn't always like this. Instead, Link actually did start with the sword, but Shigeru Miyamoto saw this and was like, "Nuh-uh, too easy, make it weirder." But he also saw playtesters struggling to understand why they were fighting giant spiders. By locking the starting weapon behind an NPC, now we have questions about the world around us, like, why is this old man giving swords to children? And why is he in a cave so far away from other people? And has anyone run a background check? I was interested to see how this evolved in Zelda 2. You know, the top-down slash side-scrolling sequel that everyone remembers as either the hidden gem in the series or the black sheep in an otherwise flawless franchise, which would be insanely impressive, considering in 1987, there was only one other Zelda game to compare it to. And we'll get into the criticisms of Zelda 2 as we look at how I implemented some of its mechanics in my own game, but for now, let's look at what it gets right. If the first game locked progression behind NPCs, the sequel just catapulted that idea into the sun. Dark caves have been turned into side-scrolling towns with hustling NPCs and interior spaces. Iconic characters like the self-aware error message now have human proportions in the side-scrolling view. Like, look at this interaction with this super kind lady who heals you in her house. Imagine what that would look like in a top-down view. Those, implications are so much more, tactile in this side view. Zelda 2's towns are actually pretty stuffed with NPCs. Talking to them reveals backstory, or gives clues on the next questline. You can also just go into people's houses and down into their basements, where strange old men give you powers. See? The formula works! Speaking of, this idea of towns being the central hub for, well, everything, would become a staple in the Zelda franchise. That's one of those design choices that help separate it from other genres. These towns give us a grounded setting, and a place to rest and remember what we're supposed to be doing. It also creates a natural progression flow. Explore the overworld, stop in the nearest town, find your next objective, rinse and repeat. So I tried building my own town, with blackjack and healers. My adventure RPG is already side-scrolling adjacent, so that's easy enough. I just locked character movement on the y-axis, or x, they move along the x-axis. You can move back or forth instead of roaming around freely like the action levels. And I did want to focus on interesting NPCs that would help ground the different RPG menus, but I also wanted to pay attention to some of the minor details in Zelda 2. So the most noticeable difference right away between Zelda 2's overworld and side-scrolling towns is proportions. Proportions can communicate all sorts of information to the player. The other noticeable difference is depth. In the top-down world, background elements are mostly relegated to floors, but in the side-scrolling view, we can stack shrubbery, trees, even some secret areas all overlapping, which adds some contrast in the amount of detail between areas. Places with enemies are decorated more plainly so that the enemies become the focal point, but in safe zones we can play around with that more. And locking player movement to pure side-scrolling means we can control the eye level, what players see first. In Zelda 2's towns, many of the upgrades happen in these interior spaces. I kept that alive in my game by moving the tavern, my original hub for NPCs, into an interior location in my town. Now, instead of existing as a nebulous space between levels, it has an address with a sign and a bulletin board outside. And it wasn't until I added the tavern that my town really felt complete. Something to think about, Orange County. But what about the overworld? I think Zelda 2 is probably most remembered as an unsuccessful blending of top-down and side-scrolling mechanics, but early reviews mostly criticize it for being too punishing, and that's being generous. It's a frustrating mess, with elite boss enemies throwing themselves at you every 2 seconds. But again, if we want to find out what went wrong, we have to figure out what problem this design choice was trying to solve. The late 80s was a fever dream of game mechanics. Developers were A, testing new game mechanics with general audiences, and B, looking to optimize combinations of those mechanics into a satisfying experience. What I mean is, developers were copying each other left and right to see what would stick. So the turn-based variation of this top-down blended experience was seen in the original Dragon Quest, which came out like a year before Zelda 2, and then was firmly established in franchises like Final Fantasy, Pokemon, Earthbound. I mean, there's literally a whole game engine devoted to making games like this. So the blending of top-down and action mechanics, on the surface, doesn't seem like much of a problem. Pokemon games sell pretty well, I hear. But after putting the top-down overworld in my game, it became immediately obvious what the problem was. It comes down to flow state. The flow state is that sweet spot between easy and difficult, that one more round feeling that makes you lose hours, sometimes days, sometimes on purpose, from the bleak, repetitive mundanity of your existence. Video games, huh? But Zelda 2 combines several mechanics that just stop that flow state dead in its tracks. Some areas you explore will need a special item, so you have to travel through the overworld to find the town with the NPC that tells you the name of the location, explore the overworld for that location, find it, go back to where you need to use it, all while fighting enemies that pop in and out. So yeah, even though Zelda 2 is a frustrating, punishing experience, from a dev standpoint, there's still a lot to learn from it. The blended top-down and side-scrolling style was experimental, and that also fits the time in which the game came out. But I think, thanks to the towns, this ultimately ended up being a successful design choice. And learning to balance that flow state is something Nintendo would perfect in future Zelda games, and then break it again in others. If anything, I think that's what makes Zelda so important as a franchise. It continues to take those experimental swings and see what hits. And yeah, I don't think there really is such a thing as bad games. Except for games that are bad, I hate those. But inside every one of those little time wasters is a collection of systems, and a lot of times the only way to figure out what works and what doesn't is to try it yourself.